To tip or not to tip? That is the question. Hello everybody, welcome to Life in France versus the UK. I'm Mark and welcome to our channel. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the red button so you don't miss any future releases. I release a video every Sunday and Thursday evening, so please join the community and learn a little bit about the differences between life in France and life in the UK. Today's video of Life in France, I'm going to talk about restaurants. Now, before I go into restaurants, one of the main elements that I moved to France for was just because of the such slower pace of life. You know, they have 2-hour lunches in France. The shops shut at 7 o'clock now in the evening, or 7:30 with supermarkets. And it's such a difference compared to the UK. And that time element really transfers to the differences between restaurants in the UK and restaurants in France. I'll also give you my top 3 restaurants that I enjoyed in the UK and also some bad ones, plus some really nice restaurants that I've enjoyed in France and my worst experience in France as well. Okay, restaurants. What's one of the biggest differences? Time. When you go to a UK restaurant, if you turn up and it's really busy, the manager or the maitre d' will say, hang on a minute, just take a seat, have a drink, and we'll set you down in about 10 minutes. If you're lucky, you do sit at your table in 10 minutes. But more often than not, you're 45 minutes, an hour, sitting at the bar, having a drink, before you sit down or walk out. The reason for that is, the owner doesn't want to lose his customers. He wants to get in as much money as possible. And in France, it's totally different, in that if you turn up at a restaurant and it's busy, ask for a table, they just say, sorry, we're full, come back another day. It's really bizarre. And it comes across rude as well. You know, they just say, come back another time. Another difference, if you turn up at a UK restaurant, let's say it closes at 2 o'clock, stops serving food, and you turn up with a party at 10, I would imagine the UK manager would bung the chef an extra 50 quid and say, come on, we've got a party at 10, can we rustle up some food for them? In France, very different. You turn up at 2:05 with a party at 10, not finished. Finished for the day. Come back at 7 o'clock. Totally different way of going about their businesses. You'll also find the time element is very noticeable when you're actually sitting down and having a meal. In France, you know, everything's so slow. It takes ages to get the menu from the waiters if it's not already on the table. And then when they take your order, you could wait 20-25 minutes before the starter arrives, and then you're waiting again for the main course, and then you have to put your hand up, you know, can we see the menu for the desserts please? And then once you finish your dessert, you could wait for half an hour before you get the bill. It's just really slow, and I guess that's one of the reasons why they turn people away at a busy restaurant, because they just don't rush anyone. On the flip side, one of my worst experiences in the UK was at Planet Hollywoods in London. I've never ever experienced anything like it. It was as though they were trying to get you in and out of that restaurant within an hour. And as soon as you ordered your starter, 5 minutes it's there. When they take the starter plate away, they put the main course straight on your table. And then it's your dessert. And then the bill actually comes with your dessert. And it's like they're really pushing you out, and I just really didn't enjoy that. So that's quite a big difference between restaurants in France and restaurants in the UK. That speed element. The other thing is, in the UK I've noticed, you know, some of the waiters and waitresses, you feel by the end of that meal, they're becoming good friends. Whereas in France, the waiters are just so aloof, you know, they stand off. Whether it's because they think that, you know, you're there to enjoy a meal with your party and they don't want to interfere, I don't know. But you don't get that sort of interaction. And I know it's not me because of my language barrier, because I've noticed they do it with the French customers as well. Whereas in the UK, some of the waiters and waitresses become really chatty, asking how you are, why you're here for the occasion, and they really sort of like try to get involved with the evening. Some entertain you and some annoy you, but that's a different thing. Guys, I said I was going to give you my top 3 restaurants in the UK. Now, when I measure a restaurant as regards to how nice the experience is, there's 3 elements for me that make the big difference. 1, obviously the food. 2, the decor and the ambience of the restaurant. And thirdly, the service that you get from the staff. Now, it was a good friend of mine that took me to my top 2 restaurants up in Glasgow. The first one was the Creme de la Creme in Glasgow. Now, this was a converted cinema that had turned into an Indian restaurant. Now, I'd been going to Indian restaurants for about 10 years before that, and I've never come across a restaurant like this. You were greeted by an Indian chap. He must have been in his 70s. He was dressed in a gold costume. He had like Alibaba shoes on that curled up at the front. He had like a gold and diamond studded knife on his belt. I don't know if that's because we're in Glasgow or just because it's part of the costume. And he looked absolutely spectacular, and he greeted everybody as they came into the restaurant. And you were taken into this restaurant, and just the feel of it was wonderful. And the food was absolutely stonking. It was the best Indian food I've ever had in my life. And I've eaten there about 3 times now. And I don't know if it's still there, but if it is, and you're in Glasgow, the Creme de la Creme. Now, Dave also took us to a restaurant up in Edinburgh called the Witchery, or the Witcheries. And this was a 1-bedroom hotel, but mainly a restaurant. Now, the restaurant itself had all beams on the ceilings, it had chandeliers coming down, candle lit, and the food was absolutely stonking. And it was 5-star service as well. So those 2 restaurants up in Scotland are number 3 and number 2. Now, the best experience ever was in London. And we found this restaurant called the Villa d'Asari. It was also known as the White Elephant. And what I didn't realise, it was a hangout for all the celebrities. There were a lot of Arab princes that used to go there. I believe Muhammad Ali went there, Tyson, Joan Collins, Elton John, you can imagine. At the time, this was what, 25 years ago, it used to cost about £100 per person for a 4-course meal, which was a huge amount of money. But it wasn't just the food that was spectacular there. The waiters, they didn't sort of walk, they just sort of glided. You know, they would come up to your table and then serve you, talk to you, and then they'd actually back off before turning around. They'd take 3 or 4 steps backwards before turning around. And it was just so graceful. But the one thing that really set this restaurant above the rest was that they had a live jazz band there, and you had this huge dance floor, and in between your meal, in between the courses of your meal, you could get up and dance. And there were little suspended lights that looked like stars hanging from the ceiling, and this was on the embankment on the Thames, and they had sort of 25-foot high arched windows that overlooked the Thames, and throughout your meal you're watching all the boats go past with the lights on. And the atmosphere is absolutely fabulous. Unfortunately, that one is closed down now. They tore it down and they built new apartments on there. Obviously, land's so expensive in London, so they made a fortune on that one. But just the experience for me, it ticked all 3 boxes. The food, the service, and just the ambience. And we actually went there about 4 times. We used to have our Christmas meals there. We couldn't afford to go there all the time, obviously. You know, like £200 for a couple. But me and the guys would go there for our Christmas do, and had a fabulous night. And it was something we always look forward to at the end of the year. As regards to France, we're lucky enough to have a really nice restaurant just around the corner from us. It cooks everything on an open fire, and the steaks are absolutely gorgeous. And the chips, I've never tasted chips like it before. It can be very expensive in the evening. You could be looking at, well, I say it's expensive. It's about 60 or 70 euros a head for a 4-course meal. But the one thing they do in France, in the restaurants, is they do sort of like set meals during the lunch times. And we send our guests there. And you can have a 3-course meal for €15.50. And some of our guests have come back and said, Mark, that's the best meal I've ever eaten in my life. That's how good the food is. Talking about steaks, that's another difference between French restaurants and English restaurants. In France, they don't understand well done. If you ask for a well done steak in France, it'll probably come out medium. They prefer to have the steak undercooked rather than overcooked, and you have to really emphasise that you want the steak well cooked, bien cuit, it's known as. Whereas on the flip side, in the UK, they tend to overcook the steaks. They don't like selling them rare or serving them rare. As an individual, I get a look of shock from the French because I ask for my steaks blue. And it's like, hooray, we found an Englishman that likes a blue steak. And yet there's a look of horror in the UK when I ask for a blue steak, because the chefs just do not like to serve up a steak that's just barely cooked. But, you know, that's how I prefer it. But in France, they definitely send their steaks out on the lower side of being cooked, whereas in the UK, they tend to be more well cooked. What else can I say? Paris. Naomi and I had our first date in Paris, and locally here you can get a coffee for €1.50. Along the Champs-Élysées, a coffee €7.50, and it was probably one of the worst coffees we've had in our lives. You're just paying for the location. You know, Paris itself is beautiful. You know, it's just full of history and everything, but you've either got to spend an arm and a leg to get a decent meal there, or they do sort of bistro sort of restaurants there. And to be honest, you're paying like, I don't know, £30 a head, and the food's not that great. We actually found, the best restaurant we found in Paris, for value for money, there was a Chinese restaurant within sort of 100 metres of Notre Dame, and we could go in there and have a really nice meal for €40. And for the 4 nights that we were there, we actually ate there twice because it was so nice. Worst restaurants? Wow. In the UK, again, this was my friend Dave up in Scotland. He was always rolling out the red carpets whenever we went up there. He would treat us so well. You know, his hospitality was phenomenal. You know, he'd make us these cooked breakfasts in the mornings when we stayed over. He'd take us to the best restaurants. But the funniest story was when he took us to this Indian restaurant, and he had raved up to us how good it was. And we went there. As we went into the door, he said, you know, made a reservation, and the guy just turned round and we were just expected to follow him. Never said a word. And he just pointed to a table, and we sat down, and I said, is this how it normally is, Dave? Because, you know, you've taken us to some really nice restaurants in the past, you know, Creme de la Creme and the Witcheries. Are you sure? And it just had curtains hanging down from the walls. It looked like they were hiding damaged walls as well. And we waited ages before we saw a menu. And when the food did come, it was absolutely shocking. It was terrible. And the guy was just dying of embarrassment. And the creme de la creme as it is, when it came to paying the bill, his credit card wouldn't work. I ended up having to pay for it. So for the worst meal in France, I guess it's going to have to be in Vannes. In Vannes they have the port, and it's like a horseshoe shape of restaurants all around the port. And we were sitting in the restaurant. I had a seafood salad, really nice, eating away. And right at the end, the final leaf I turned over, and there was a live maggot underneath the leaf. And you could tell it was from the seafood just because of the coloration. You know, being a fisherman, I know what the maggots look like. And whether it's, you know, if I'm in the UK, I'm one for complaining. If I don't like something, I'll complain. And more often than not, I'll get a free meal for myself if the meal wasn't great, or I could even get a free meal for the whole party. But in France, because of the language barrier, I find it hard to complain. And I called the waiter over and I just said, look, there's a maggot. And typical, he just shrugged his shoulders and was like, what do you want me to do? And I sort of just looked at him aghast. I think, you've got no apology or anything. I said, what are you going to do to make me happy? And all he did was gave me a free dessert at the end. And the thing that kept going through my head was, I hope that was the only maggot on that table. Guys, My best experience in France was a hotel in Grenoble. It was for New Year's Eve, and they had a restaurant, and again it was just purely the experience as a whole. It was a 7-course meal, and after the first couple of courses you had a sort of palate cleanser, sorbet, but we were there for 6 hours, and there was a dance floor, and in between courses you could actually get up and have a dance. And for me, that's the best memory I've had of a restaurant in France. Purely because of the whole thing together. The hotel looked spectacular, we were dressed for the occasion, the food was fantastic, and obviously the dancing as well. So it hit every box. So for me, that was my best memory of a restaurant in France, in Grenoble. To tip or not to tip? That is the question. Now for me, I only tip if I get a good service. Because the way I think about it is you're paying for a meal, the price list is on there, you're paying for the drinks and the food. Tip is for good service. If you don't get good service, I don't tip. And the one problem you have in France is customer service. It can be a little bit lacking. Now that Naomi and I have children, particularly if the waiters make a fuss for the children and they make sure the children are happy, I do give a tip. But it's not very often. We actually stopped going to restaurants in France because we just felt so uncomfortable with young children. Not only did the waiters look at us wrong, but also the rest of the patrons. The French, they just didn't like the fact that it was as though, oh, can't you control your children? But that's young children. They make a noise, they want to run around. But we had to stop going to restaurants in France until the children were sort of 3 or 4 years of age because we felt so uncomfortable. Whereas in the UK, that's the one thing I've noticed as well, particularly if you've got children, no one seems to mind. All the other guests, all the other people having a meal in the restaurant actually like the fact that the children are running around and they actually interact with them. And you can see that it puts smiles on everybody's faces seeing the children happy. And the waiters make a fuss of them, give them some papers to draw on and so forth. But that doesn't happen in France. So in the UK, yes, I tip a lot. But in France, it's very rare that I actually tip. Oh, I mentioned earlier, there is a problem sometimes with how long it takes to get the bill. Quick tip, when you get your dessert in France, ask for the bill at that point. Don't just take your dessert, eat it, and then have to wait for the bill. I have to get up, I can't wait that long, 30 minutes to get the bill. So as soon as the dessert arrives, I actually ask for the bill at that point. Same as when I'm in a coffee bar. As soon as I ask for the coffee, I say, can I have a coffee and the bill please? Otherwise you're just sitting there for ages and it takes ages to get noticed by the waiter or waitress. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this short video on the difference between life in France and life in the UK and comparing the restaurants in the UK and France. If you did, please give it a big like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and obviously hit that red button. See you again on Thursday. Take care everybody. Thanks ever so much for watching.